3 days to save the war, USS Yorktown, and the battle that changed everything. On the morning of May 27, 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown limped into Pearl Harbor, trailing an oil slick and listing slightly to port. She had been bombed at the Battle of the Coral Sea 8 days earlier. A single Japanese bomb had penetrated 4 decks before exploding, killing 66 men and causing severe structural damage. Fires had raged. The ship's superheater boilers had been disabled. Navy inspectors who swarmed aboard at Pearl estimated the damage would require at least 2 weeks to repair, probably longer. Admiral Chester Nimitz listened to their assessment, then looked at the calendar. He knew something the inspectors did not. American codebreakers had decrypted Japanese naval communications and learned that a massive enemy fleet was heading toward Midway Island. The attack would come in early June, less than a week away. Nimitz needed every carrier he could get. He looked at the inspectors and gave an order that seemed impossible. "We must have this ship back in 3 days." They worked for 72 hours straight. Welders worked around the clock. Carpenters shored up damaged structures. Electricians rewired systems. Some repairs that would normally have taken weeks were completed in hours. Others that would have taken days were patched temporarily, but good enough. On May 30th, just 72 hours after entering dry dock Yorktown, put to sea again. She was not fully repaired. Her damaged superheater boilers were untouched, limiting her top speed, but she could fight. 5 days later, at the Battle of Midway, Yorktown's aircraft would help destroy the Japanese carrier striking force. Her dive bombers would cripple one enemy carrier, while she absorbed Japanese counterattacks that would otherwise have been directed at other American ships. She would be bombed, torpedoed, and ultimately sunk, but not before playing the decisive role in the most important naval battle of the Pacific War. This is the story of the USS Yorktown, a ship that was rushed back into battle before she was ready, that fought with extraordinary courage against impossible odds, and that refused to die quietly even after she had been mortally wounded. The USS Yorktown was laid down on May 21, 1934, at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, at a time when the aircraft carrier was still an experimental concept in naval warfare. The first purpose-built American carriers, Lexington and Saratoga, had been converted from battlecruiser hulls in the 1920s. USS Ranger, completed in 1934, was the Navy's first purpose-built carrier, designed from the keel up, but she was small and underarmed, built within treaty limitations that proved too restrictive. Yorktown and her sister Enterprise represented the Navy's refined vision of what a carrier should be: large enough to operate substantial air groups, fast enough to keep up with the battle fleet, and well protected enough to survive combat damage. At over 800 feet long and displacing more than 25,000 tons, Yorktown could carry up to 90 aircraft and steam at better than 30 knots. She mounted 8 5-inch guns for surface defense and was protected by armor belts, armored decks, and subdivision of interior spaces designed to contain damage. When she was launched on April 4, 1936, with Eleanor Roosevelt serving as sponsor, and commissioned on September 30, 1937, Yorktown represented the cutting edge of American naval aviation. For the next 4 years, Yorktown operated with the fleet during an uneasy period when war seemed increasingly likely but had not yet arrived. She participated in Fleet Problems large-scale exercises that tested tactics and trained crews for the possibility of conflict. Fleet Problem 20, in February 1939, included scenarios involving carrier operations for convoy escort, anti-submarine defense, and attacks on surface ships and shore installations, all of which would prove relevant when war actually came. Critics of the exercises noted that both Yorktown and Enterprise, though comparatively new to the fleet, made significant contributions demonstrating that the Navy was learning to employ carriers effectively. In April 1939, Yorktown transited the Panama Canal and joined the Pacific Fleet operating out of San Diego and participating in Fleet Problem YF-1 the following spring. That exercise proved prophetic. One scenario specifically highlighted the need to coordinate Army and Navy defense plans for the Hawaiian Islands, and another demonstrated that aircraft could track surface forces at high altitude. Both lessons would be remembered on December 7, 1941. In April 1941, responding to the success of German U-boats against British shipping in the Atlantic, the Navy transferred Yorktown back to the Atlantic Fleet, along with a battleship division and supporting ships. The carrier spent the next 8 months conducting neutrality patrols, escorting convoys from Newfoundland to Bermuda, and operating on a wartime footing, even though America was technically still at peace. In late October 1941, while escorting a convoy, Yorktown and her escorts made multiple submarine contacts. Destroyers dropped depth charges. The convoy made emergency turns. German radio signals indicated U-boats were tracking the convoy and reporting its position. It was an undeclared war, and everyone knew the real thing could not be far off. On December 7, 1941, when Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor, Yorktown was at Norfolk, Virginia, having just returned from a neutrality patrol. The carrier was 3,000 miles from the action, but the attack changed everything. With the Pacific Fleet's battleships sunk or damaged, the handful of American carriers became critical. There were only 3 in the Pacific Enterprise, Lexington and Saratoga, and they would have to carry the burden of the war until reinforcements arrived. Yorktown departed Norfolk on December 16th, bound for the Pacific. Her secondary gun galleries bristled with new Oerlikon, 20mm anti-aircraft guns, rushed into installation as the Navy scrambled to improve carrier defenses. According to one report, sailors improvised additional gun mounts using swab handles wedged into safety line pipes, turning Yorktown into a vessel that bristled with more guns than a Mexican Revolution movie. She reached San Diego on December 30th and became flagship of Rear Admiral Frank Fletcher's newly formed Task Force 17. Yorktown's first mission was escorting Marine reinforcements to American Samoa, a defensive deployment to strengthen garrisons threatened by Japanese expansion. But by late January 1942, Admiral Nimitz had decided that purely defensive operations were not enough. The Japanese had achieved stunning victories across the Pacific, and American morale was collapsing. Small offensive raids might not accomplish much strategically, but they would demonstrate that America could still strike back. On February 1st, 1942, Task Force 17 and Task Force 8, built around Enterprise, launched coordinated attacks on Japanese-held islands in the Marshalls and Gilberts. Yorktown's aircraft hit installations at Jaluit Makin and Mili atolls. The raids were hampered by severe thunderstorms, and 7 aircraft were lost, but the operation was judged a success. Nimitz called it well-conceived, well-planned, and brilliantly executed. More importantly, it showed that American carriers could strike Japanese positions and withdraw before being caught. The tactic would be repeated in the months ahead. On March 10, 1942, Yorktown participated in a more significant operation, a raid on Japanese forces landing at Salamaua and Lae on the northeastern coast of New Guinea. Operating in coordination with Lexington, Yorktown launched her air group before dawn. The aircraft flew across the Owen Stanley Mountains, approaching the target from an unexpected direction that ensured complete surprise. In the attacks that followed, American planes sank or damaged several Japanese transports and escort vessels, disrupting the landing operations and delaying Japan's advance toward Australia. Of 104 aircraft launched, 103 returned safely. The raid provided invaluable combat experience for pilots and aircrews who had never before attacked defended targets. These same men would apply what they learned at the Coral Sea and at Midway. By late April 1942, American intelligence had detected Japanese preparations for a major offensive. The target appeared to be Port Moresby, the last Allied base on New Guinea's southern coast, whose capture would bring Japanese forces within striking distance of Australia. Nimitz ordered Task Force 17, now commanded by Fletcher with his flag in Yorktown, to intercept. On May 1st, Yorktown rendezvoused with Task Force 11, built around Lexington in the Coral Sea. The combined force waited, searching for the Japanese fleet that intelligence said was coming. On May 4th, word arrived that Japanese forces were landing at Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. Yorktown raced north at 27 knots, and launched 3 consecutive strikes against the newly established beachhead, sinking a destroyer, 3 minesweepers, and 4 barges, and destroying 5 seaplanes. It was a tactical success, but strategically minor. The main Japanese force was still approaching Port Moresby, and the decisive battle was yet to come. On May the 7th, American search planes located a Japanese carrier and escorting ships heading toward Port Moresby. Yorktown and Lexington launched full strike groups. The target was Shoho, a small carrier converted from a submarine tender. American dive bombers and torpedo planes overwhelmed her defenses. Within minutes, Shoho was burning and listing her flight deck torn apart by bombs and torpedoes. One of Lexington's pilots radioed back the laconic message, "Scratch 1 flat top." It was the first Japanese carrier sunk in the war, but the main Japanese force carriers Shikaku and Zuikaku, Pearl Harbor veterans, with experienced air groups, had not yet been located. Both sides searched through the afternoon and into the evening. Japanese aircraft actually located Yorktown and Lexington, but arrived at twilight when identification was difficult and defenses were alert. American fighters shot down 9 enemy planes. 3 more Japanese pilots, confused in the darkness, actually tried to land on Yorktown before being driven off by anti-aircraft fire. The Battle of the Coral Sea would be decided the following day. On the morning of May the 8th, search planes from both sides located their opponents almost simultaneously. The ensuing battle was fought entirely by aircraft. The surface ships never came within sight of each other, the first naval engagement in history where that was true. Yorktown's dive bombers located Shikaku and scored 2 direct hits with 1,000-pound bombs, tearing open her flight deck and setting fires that killed over 100 Japanese sailors and wounded 40 more. Lexington's planes added another hit. Shikaku was crippled, unable to launch or recover aircraft, and would limp back to Japan for months of repairs. Zuikaku escaped damage by hiding in a rain squall, but her air group had been decimated in combat, and she too would return to Japan. Meanwhile, Japanese aircraft from both carriers had found the American force. Lexington, maneuvered skillfully by her captain, was nonetheless torpedoed twice on the port side and hit by 3 bombs. She began listing and burning. Yorktown, under the command of Captain Elliot Buckmaster, dodged 8 torpedoes through skillful ship handling, but 1 bomb penetrated 4 decks before exploding deep in the ship. The blast tore through an aviation storage room, killed or seriously wounded 66 men, damaged the superheater boilers, and started fires. Near misses underwater cracked hull plates. Yorktown slowed, listing slightly trailing smoke, but her damage control parties brought the fires under control within the hour, and she was soon making 19 knots. She could still fight. Lexington was not so fortunate. Her damage control teams had contained the initial fires and flooding, and for several hours it appeared she would survive. Then gasoline vapors from ruptured fuel lines ignited deep in the ship. A massive explosion tore through her interior. More explosions followed as fires reached ammunition stores. By late afternoon, it was clear that Lexington could not be saved. Her crew was ordered to abandon ship, and later that evening, the destroyer Phelps torpedoed her to prevent capture. The Battle of the Coral Sea was over. Tactically, Japan had won. They sank a fleet carrier and inflicted heavier casualties on American forces. Strategically, the Allies had achieved something more important. The Japanese invasion force headed for Port Moresby turned back. The Japanese advance had been checked for the first time, and both Shikaku and Zuikaku were so damaged or depleted that they would miss the next major engagement, the Battle of Midway. Yorktown, despite her damage, steamed back to Pearl Harbor, arriving on May 27th. Navy inspectors swarmed aboard and delivered their verdict: 2 weeks minimum for repairs, probably 3. Admiral Nimitz had a different timeline in mind. Japanese messages decoded by American cryptanalysts indicated that Admiral Yamamoto was planning a massive operation for early June. The target was Midway Island, the westernmost outpost of the Hawaiian chain. The Japanese intended to seize the island and use it as bait to draw out and destroy the remnants of the American Pacific Fleet. Yamamoto was bringing 4 fleet carriers, 11 battleships, and over 200 supporting ships, the largest naval force Japan had ever assembled for a single operation. To oppose them, Nimitz had 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and if she could be made ready, Yorktown. He needed that 3rd carrier. 72 hours, he told the repair crews. Make it work. What happened next was one of the more remarkable feats of damage control and repair work of the entire war. More than 1,400 civilian workers and Navy personnel swarmed aboard Yorktown as soon as she entered dry dock on May 28th. They worked in 3 shifts around the clock. Welders repaired fractures in the hull and deck. Carpenters shored up damaged structures with timber and steel bracing. Electricians rewired damaged systems. Some repairs were temporary patches that would hold long enough for one more battle. The damaged superheater boilers were not touched. There simply was not time to repair them properly, which meant Yorktown's top speed would be reduced. But she would be able to steam to launch and recover aircraft to fight. On the morning of May 30th, just 48 hours after entering dry dock, Yorktown undocked. Repair crews were still aboard finishing work as the carrier moved to the fueling pier. Her air group, depleted by Coral Sea losses, was augmented with aircraft and crews from Saratoga, which was still being refitted on the west coast after torpedo damage. On the afternoon of May 30th, Yorktown put to sea as the core of Task Force 17. Civilian workers were ferried ashore at the last minute. The carrier headed northwest toward a rendezvous point designated Point Luck, 200 miles northeast of Midway. Enterprise and Hornet, operating as Task Force 16 under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, were already at sea. The trap was set. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, Japanese carriers Akagi Kaga Soryu and Hiryu launched strikes against Midway Island. Their aircraft bombed the airfield and installations, but failed to suppress the island's defenses. Meanwhile, search planes from Midway had located the Japanese fleet and broadcast its position. Admiral Fletcher, in tactical command of the American forces, ordered Spruance's Task Force 16 to launch a strike. Yorktown held back, waiting for her scouts to complete their search patterns before committing her aircraft. When the scouts returned without sighting additional enemy forces, Yorktown launched her attack group at 900 am, 17 dive bombers, 12 torpedo bombers, and 6 fighters. The American attack was poorly coordinated. The torpedo squadrons from all 3 carriers found the Japanese fleet first attacking without fighter escort or dive bomber support. It was a slaughter. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet was annihilated, all 15 aircraft shot down with only 1 survivor. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of 14 planes. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown lost 10 of 12. Of 41 torpedo bombers that attacked, only 6 survived, and they scored no hits. The sacrifice seemed futile, but the torpedo attacks had drawn Japanese fighters down to sea level, leaving the high-altitude combat air patrol depleted and out of position. When American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown arrived minutes later, they found the Japanese carriers with virtually no high-altitude defense. The attack was devastating and precise. Enterprise's dive bombers struck Akagi and Kaga, scoring multiple hits that set both carriers ablaze, with bombs-fueled aircraft and torpedoes on their hangar decks. Yorktown's dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, attacked Soryu. In a near-perfect attack run, Leslie's squadron scored 3 direct hits with 1,000-pound bombs. Soryu's flight deck erupted in flames. Within minutes, all 3 carriers were burning wrecks. Their air groups destroyed their crews, abandoning ship. In the space of 5 minutes, the balance of naval power in the Pacific had shifted irrevocably. But the battle was not over. The 4th Japanese carrier Hiryu, separated from her sisters, had escaped the attack. Her aircraft were about to exact revenge. At approximately 10 p.m, Yorktown's radar picked up incoming aircraft at 32 miles. The carrier went to battle stations. Her combat air patrol was vectored out to intercept. Fighters shot down several Japanese dive bombers, but the rest broke through. Captain Buckmaster maneuvered Yorktown, radically twisting and turning to present a difficult target. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, but 3 bombs struck home. The first hit above the number 2 elevator on the starboard side, blasting a 10-foot hole in the flight deck, and killing gun crews. The second bomb, in what gunners call a down-the-stack shot, penetrated the funnel and exploded in the boiler uptakes, disabling most of the ship's boilers. The third bomb hit near the number 1 elevator and exploded on the 4th deck, starting a fire near the forward gasoline storage and magazines. The ship slowed, smoke pouring from her stack, and came to a dead stop 20 minutes after the attack. She was crippled, but not finished. Damage control parties worked frantically while the ship lay dead in the water. They cleared stack gases from flooded fire rooms. They got one boiler back online and used its steam to restart others. They patched the flight deck with steel plates. Within an hour, against all odds, Yorktown had power again. At 2:50 p.m., black smoke began rising from her stack. She was making 5 knots, then 10, then 20. Captain Buckmaster ordered a huge new American flag 10 feet wide and 15 feet long hoisted to the foremast. One observer, Ensign John Dark Lawrence, later wrote, "For the first time, I realized what the flag meant. All of us, a million faces, all our effort, a whisper of encouragement." Yorktown was recovering aircraft and refueling fighters on deck when radar picked up another incoming strike at 3:30 p.m. The second attack came from Hiryu's remaining torpedo bombers, 10 Nakajima B-5N, Kate aircraft escorted by 60 fighters. Yorktown's combat air patrol intercepted and shot down at least 3, but the rest pressed their attack. The carrier maneuvered radically, her wake churning white as she dodged torpedoes. She avoided at least 2. Then at 4:20 p.m., 2 torpedoes struck the port side within minutes of each other. The explosions were devastating. Power failed completely. The rudder jammed. Yorktown began listing to port, and the list increased rapidly. With no power to run pumps or control flooding, the damage control officer reported that saving the ship looked impossible. The list reached 17 degrees, then 20, then 26. Captain Buckmaster and his damage control officer agreed that capsizing was imminent. At 5:00 p.m., Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship. The crew evacuated in good order, lowering wounded into life rafts, then going over the side themselves. Buckmaster made a final tour of the ship to ensure no one remained, then lowered himself into the water by a line over the stern. Destroyers and cruisers picked up survivors. Buckmaster was transferred to the cruiser Astoria, where he reported to Admiral Fletcher. Both men agreed that a salvage attempt should be made. Yorktown stubbornly remained afloat, despite the heavy list and damage. Throughout the night of June 4th, Yorktown floated, listing heavily, but refusing to sink. 2 men were still aboard. One managed to attract attention by firing a machine gun into the air. The destroyer Hughes picked them up, though one later died of his injuries. On the morning of June the 5th, Captain Buckmaster led a salvage party back aboard. 170 officers and men worked to reduce topside weight pump water from flooded compartments and restore power. The destroyer Hammond came alongside to provide auxiliary power and pumps. The fleet tug Vireo took Yorktown in tow. Progress was painfully slow but encouraging. The list decreased by 2 degrees. One 5-inch gun was pushed overboard. Aircraft were shoved into the sea. Water was pumped from engineering spaces. The salvage crew worked through June 5th and into June 6th. By mid-afternoon on June 6th, spirits were rising. It looked like Yorktown might actually be saved. Then at 3:36 p.m., lookouts spotted torpedo wakes approaching from the starboard beam. Japanese submarine I-68, which had evaded the destroyer screen, fired 4 torpedoes from close range. One struck Hammond directly, amidships breaking the destroyer in half. She sank in minutes. 2 torpedoes struck Yorktown at the turn of the bilge. The 4th missed astern. About a minute after Hammond sank, her depth charges detonated underwater, the concussion killing many survivors in the water and battering Yorktown's already damaged hull. The salvage crew was evacuated. Throughout the night and into June 7, Yorktown floated, but her list increased steadily. At 5:30 a.m. on June 7th, observers noted the list was rapidly worsening. At 7:01 a.m., the carrier rolled completely over, paused upside down for several moments with her battle flag still flying, then slowly sank stern first into 3,000 fathoms of water. Ships in the area half-masted their colors. Sailors stood at attention with tears in their eyes. 2 patrolling PBY flying boats appeared overhead and dipped their wings in final salute. Yorktown was gone, taking 141 officers and men with her. The Battle of Midway was over, and it had changed the course of the war. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi Kaga Soryu and Hiryu, along with their highly trained air groups and many of their most experienced pilots. The United States lost Yorktown and the destroyer Hamon. Strategically, it was not even close. Japan's carrier striking force, which had dominated the Pacific for 6 months, had been destroyed. The initiative passed to the United States and would never return to Japan. Naval historians consider Midway the turning point of the Pacific War, and Yorktown played a crucial role in that victory. Her dive bombers crippled Soryu in the morning attack. More importantly, by absorbing both Japanese counterattacks on June 4th, she shielded Enterprise and Hornet from damage. If Hiryu's aircraft had attacked those carriers instead, the American victory might have been much more costly. Yorktown bought time with her own destruction. The wreck of Yorktown lay undiscovered for 56 years. On May 19, 1998, oceanographer Robert Ballard, who had previously discovered the wrecks of Titanic and the German battleship Bismarck, located Yorktown, sitting upright in 3 miles of water, approximately 300 miles northwest of Midway. Despite spending more than half a century on the deep-sea floor, the ship was in remarkable condition. Much of her paint was still visible. Equipment could be identified. During subsequent surveys, including a detailed exploration in September 2023 and a live-streamed ROV dive in April 2025, researchers discovered surprising details. A 1941 Ford station wagon was visible in the hangar bay, presumably the personal vehicle of a senior officer. At least 3 SBD Dauntless dive bombers sat on the hangar deck. Most remarkably, hand-painted murals on the ship's walls remained intact artwork created by sailors during long deployments preserved by the cold, dark water. The discoveries humanized the wreck, reminding viewers that Yorktown was not just a military asset, but a home to thousands of men, many of whom died with her. Yorktown earned 3 battle stars for her World War II service. 1 for the Marshal's Gilbert's raid, 1 for the Battle of the Coral Sea, and 1 for the Battle of Midway. The second Essex-class carrier, originally to be named Bonhomme Richard, was renamed Yorktown in her honor. That ship, CV-10, served with distinction throughout the war and is now preserved as a museum ship in Charleston, South Carolina. The name Yorktown has been carried by other ships since, but CV-5 remains the most famous, the carrier that was rushed back into battle before she was ready, that fought at Coral Sea and Midway in the span of a month, and that refused to die even after being bombed and torpedoed. The story of the 72-hour repair at Pearl Harbor has become legendary, an example of what can be accomplished when necessity demands the impossible. The sailors who worked those 3 days without rest knew they were not just repairing a ship. They were preparing her for the most important battle of the war. They succeeded. Yorktown sailed on time, fought at Midway, and helped win the battle that changed everything. That she died in the process does not diminish her achievement. Ships can be replaced. Victories like Midway come once in a war, if at all. Yorktown bought that victory with her life, and it was a trade worth making.